So now you have your mic plugged into your interface, or your instrument plugged into an amp going through the mic to your interface. And your interface is going into your computer, with the exception of the USB microphones that I mentioned earlier. So now we're at the point where we can actually start looking at our digital audio workstation, our DAW. One of the most crucial things to do at this point is to tell your computer how accurately you want to represent your real-world environment. Because as I said earlier, on the digital interface, we are just viewing a representation, okay? On the computer, that's not our actual recording. It is a digital recreation. It is sampling our recording over time to try to recreate the frequency, the amplitude, all of that sonic information over time. That's why the first thing that we should do whenever we open our digital audio workstation to make a recording is set the sample rate and the bit depth. Without going too deep into it, the sample rate is essentially saying, for the computer, how often should I sample the actual audio that's coming into my microphone? All right, so obviously the more samples taken over time is going to lead to a more accurate representation of what I'm actually recording. Now there are suggested sample rates to be using for various projects, but again, there are a few things to consider. A higher sample rate leads to a larger file size, and if you don't really have the disk space to be working with really large files, or the CPU, the processing on your computer can really be taxed by working with really large sample rate files. Those are larger audio files. Kind of the range of the most common sample rates that we work with nowadays, on the low end would be 44.1 kilohertz. Okay, that's a very common delivery format. So that might not be a good format to record in because it's not considered very precise. On the high end, we have all the way up to 192 kilohertz sample rate. And that is, if a pro studio is recording music for an album or like a commercial project, they're probably recording at that sample rate. But their file size is going to be huge and they need a lot of really good processing power to actually work and edit those files. So the main thing to consider here is what kind of computer setup do you have? What kind of storage do you have? Because you're probably going to want to find yourself above 44.1 kilohertz. But, depending on your computer, you might want to maybe scale it back from 192 kilohertz. Now, I personally record at 48 kilohertz. Okay, I don't have the best computer setup, but I'm getting slightly better audio quality from that higher sample rate. And finally, bit depth is a related concept. It's essentially the amount of information that can be potentially contained in each sample. So if you have like a really high sample rate and a low bit depth, it's saying that, there's a lot of samples, but I'm not really able to put in a ton of information into each of those samples. So you could actually still end up with a low quality audio recording. Common bit depths are 16-bit, 24-bit, you can even see 32-bit, also called float, in various recording programs. Again, very commonly 16-bit is more of a delivery format, so that might be what you end up at once you're finally finalizing your music project. But 24-bit is very, very common to be working in through the editing process. So just a general takeaway for most of you out there, a good bit depth would be 24-bit as you're recording your project and editing your project. A good sample rate is a little bit more variable, as you really don't want to be as low as 44.1 kilohertz. But see how high your computer can take it past that point. Okay, your DAW is going to have a lot of options, and just find the one where you're able to edit smoothly and you're not taking up all of your disk space either. And each of these DAWs is going to have a different space in the interface in which you can adjust those settings. So often it's just in the preferences menu, or it could be in the project settings menu. So be sure you set your sample rate and bit depth before you begin the project, just to eliminate any hassle later on once you've already got several things recorded at the wrong sample rate, for example.